but sorrows under a smile and carry on. So I went back to my work. I stopped being bitter and rebellious. I kept saying to myself, it is done. I can't change it, but I can and will carry on as he wished me to do. I threw all my mind and strength into my work. I wrote letters to soldiers, to other people's boys. I joined an adult education class at night, seeking out new interests and making new friends. I can hardly believe the change that has come over me. I have ceased mourning over the past that is forever gone. I am living each day now with joy, just as my nephew would have wanted me to do. I have made peace with life. I have accepted my fate. I am now living a fuller and more complete life than I have ever known. Elizabeth Conley learned what all of us will have to learn sooner or later, namely that we must accept and cooperate with the inevitable. It is so, it cannot be otherwise. That's not an easy lesson to learn. Even kings on their thrones have to keep reminding themselves of it. The late George V had these framed words hanging on the wall of his library at Buckingham Palace. "Teach me neither to cry for the moon nor over spilt milk." The same thought is expressed by Schopenhauer in this way: "A good supply of resignation is of the first importance in providing for the journey of life." Obviously, circumstances alone do not make us happy or unhappy. It is the way we react to circumstances that determines our feelings. Jesus said that the kingdom of heaven is within you. That is where the kingdom of hell is, too. We can all endure disaster and tragedy and triumph over them if we have to. We may not think we can, but we have surprisingly strong inner resources that will see us through if we will only make use of them. We are stronger than we think. The late Booth Tarkington always said, "I could take anything that life could force upon me except one thing, blindness. I could never endure that." Then one day, when he was along in his 60s, Tarkington glanced down at the carpet on the floor. The colors were blurred. He couldn't see the pattern. He went to a specialist. He learned the tragic truth. He was losing his sight. One eye was nearly blind, and the other would follow. That which he feared most had come upon him. How did Tarkington react to this worst of all disasters? Did he feel, this is it, this is the end of my life? No. To his amazement, he felt quite gay. He even called upon his humor. Floating specks annoyed him. They would swim across his eyes and cut off his vision. Yet when the largest of these specks would swim across his sight, he would say, "Hello, there's Grandfather again. Wonder where he's going this fine morning." How could fate ever conquer a spirit like that? Well, the answer is it couldn't. When total darkness closed in, Tarkington said, "I found I could take the loss of my eyesight just as a man can take anything else. If I lost all 5 of my senses, I know I could live on inside my mind. For it is in the mind we see, and in the mind we live, whether we know it or not." In the hope of restoring his eyesight, Tarkington had to go through more than 12 operations within 1 year, with local anesthetic. Did he rail against this? He knew it had to be done. He knew he couldn't escape it, so the only way to lessen his suffering was to take it with grace. He refused a private room at the hospital and went into a ward where he could be with other people who had troubles too. He tried to cheer them up, and when he had to submit to repeated operations, fully conscious of what was being done to his eyes, he tried to remember how fortunate he was. How wonderful, he said, how wonderful that science now has the skill to operate on anything so delicate as the human eye. The average man would have been a nervous wreck if he had had to endure more than 12 operations and blindness. Yet Tarkington said, "I would not exchange this experience for a happier one." It taught him acceptance. It taught him that nothing life could bring him was beyond his strength to endure. It taught him, as John Milton discovered, that it is not miserable to be blind, it is only miserable not to be able to endure blindness. Margaret Fuller, the famous New England feminist, once offered as her credo, "I accept the universe." When grouchy old Thomas Carlyle heard that in England, he snorted, "By gad, she'd better. Yes, and by gad, you and I had better accept the inevitable, too." If we rail and kick against it and grow bitter, we won't change the inevitable, but we will change ourselves. I know. I've tried it. I once refused to accept an inevitable situation with which I was confronted. I played the fool and railed against it and rebelled. It ruined my nights into hells of insomnia. I brought upon myself everything I didn't want. Finally, after a year of self-torture, I had to accept what I knew from the outset I couldn't possibly alter. I should have cried out years ago with old Walt Whitman, "Oh, to confront night, storms, hunger, ridicule, accident, rebuffs, as the trees and animals do." I spent 12 years working with cattle. Yet I never saw a Jersey cow running a temperature because the pasture was burning up from a lack of rain, or because of sleet and cold, or because her boyfriend was paying too much attention to another heifer. The animals confront night, storms, and hunger calmly, so they never have nervous breakdowns or stomach ulcers, and they never go insane. Am I advocating that we simply bow down to all the adversities that come our way? Not by a long shot. That's mere fatalism. As long as there's a chance we can save a situation, let's fight. But when common sense tells us that we're up against something that is so and cannot be otherwise, then in the name of our sanity, let's not look before and after and pine for what is not. The late Dean Hawkes of Columbia University told me that he had taken a Mother Goose rhyme as one of his mottos. For every ailment under the sun there is a remedy, or there is none. If there be one, try to find it. If there be none, never mind it. While writing this book, I interviewed a number of the leading business executives of America, and I was impressed by the fact that they cooperated with the inevitable and led lives singularly free from worry. If they hadn't done that, they would have cracked under the strain. Here are a few examples of what I mean. J.C. Penney, founder of the nationwide chain of Penny stores, said to me, "I wouldn't worry if I lost every dollar I have, because I don't see what is to be gained by worrying. I do the best job I possibly can and leave the results in the laps of the gods." Henry Ford told me much the same thing. "When I can't handle events," he said, "I let them handle themselves." When I asked K.T. Keller, then president of the Chrysler Corporation, how he kept from worrying, he replied, "When I'm up against a tough situation, if I can do anything about it, I do it. If I can't, I just forget it. I never worry about the future because I know no man living can possibly figure out what's going to happen in the future. There are so many forces that will affect the future. Nobody can tell what prompts these forces or understands them, so why worry about them?" K.T. Keller would be embarrassed if you told him he's a philosopher. He's just a good businessman. Yet he has stumbled onto the same philosophy that Epictetus taught in Rome 19 centuries ago. There is only one way to happiness, Epictetus taught the Romans, and that is to cease worrying about things which are beyond the power of our will. Sarah Bernhardt, the divine Sarah, was an illustrious example of a woman who knew how to cooperate with the inevitable. For half a century, she had been the reigning queen of the theater on 4 continents, the best-loved actress on earth. Then, when she was 71 and broke, she had lost all her money. Her physician, Professor Posey of Paris, told her he would have to amputate her leg. While crossing the Atlantic, she had fallen on deck during a storm and injured her leg severely. Phlebitis developed. Her leg shrank. The pain became so intense that the doctors felt her leg had to be amputated. He was almost afraid to tell the stormy, tempestuous, divine Sarah what had to be done. He fully expected that the terrible news would set off an explosion of hysteria. But he was wrong. Sarah looked at him a moment and then said quietly, "If it has to be, it has to be." It was fate. As she was being wheeled away to the operating room, her son stood weeping. She waved to him with a gay gesture and said cheerfully, "Don't go away, I'll be right back." On the way to the operating room, she recited a scene from one of her plays. Someone asked her if she were doing this to cheer herself up. She said, "No, to cheer up the doctors and nurses. It will be a strain on them." After recovering from the operation, Sarah Bernhardt went on touring the world and enchanting audiences for another 7 years. "When we stop fighting the inevitable," said Elsie McCormick in a Reader's Digest article, "we release energy which enables us to create a richer life." No one living has enough emotion and vigor to fight the inevitable, and at the same time enough left over to create a new life. Choose one or the other. You can either bend with the inevitable sleet storms of life, or you can resist them and break. I saw that happen on a farm I own in Missouri. I planted a score of trees on that farm. At first they grew with astonishing rapidity. Then a sleet storm encrusted each twig and branch with a heavy coating of ice. Instead of bowing gracefully to their burden, these trees proudly resisted, and broke and split under the load, and had to be destroyed. They hadn't learned the wisdom of the forests of the north. I've traveled hundreds of miles through the evergreen forests of Canada, yet I have never seen a spruce or a pine broken by sleet or ice. These evergreen forests know how to bend, how to bow down their branches, how to cooperate with the inevitable. The masters of jiu-jitsu teach their pupils to bend like the willow, don't resist like the oak. Why do you think your automobile tires stand up on the road and take so much punishment? At first, the tire manufacturers tried to make a tire that would resist the shocks of the road. It was soon cut to ribbons. Then they made a tire that would absorb the shocks of the road. That tire could take it. You and I will last longer and enjoy smoother riding if we learn to absorb the shocks and jolts along the rocky road of life. What will happen to you and me if we resist the shocks of life instead of absorbing them? What will happen if we refuse to bend like the willow and insist on resisting like the oak? The answer is easy. We will set up a series of inner conflicts. We will be worried, tense, strained, and neurotic. If we go still further and reject the harsh world of reality and retreat into a dream world of our own making, we will then be insane. During the war, millions of frightened soldiers had either to accept the inevitable or break under the strain. To illustrate, let's take the case of William H. Cassilis of Glendale, New York. Here's a prize-winning talk he gave before one of my classes in New York. Shortly after I joined the Coast Guard, I was assigned to one of the hottest spots on this side of the Atlantic. I was made a supervisor of explosives. Imagine it, me, a cracker salesman, becoming a supervisor of explosives. The very thought of finding yourself standing on top of thousands of tons of TNT is enough to chill the marrow in a cracker salesman's bones. I was given only 2 days of instruction, and what I learned filled me with even more terror. I'll never forget my first assignment. On a dark, cold, foggy day, I was given my orders on the open pier of Caven Point, Bayonne, New Jersey. I was assigned to hold number 5 on my ship. I had to work down in that hold with 5 longshoremen. They had strong backs, but they knew nothing whatever about explosives, and they were loading blockbusters, each one of which contained a ton of TNT, enough explosive to blow that old ship to kingdom come. These blockbusters were being lowered by 2 cable slings. I kept saying to myself, suppose one of those cables slipped or broke. Oh, boy, I was scared. I trembled, my mouth was dry, my knees sagged, my heart pounded, but I couldn't run away. That would be desertion. I would be disgraced, my parents would be disgraced, and I might be shot for desertion. I couldn't run, I had to stay. I kept looking at the careless way those longshoremen were handling those blockbusters. The ship might blow up any minute. After an hour or more of this spine-chilling terror, I began to use a little common sense. I gave myself a good talking to. I said, look here, so you're blown up, so what? You'll never know the difference. It'll be an easy way to die, much better than die.